Good evening. This is Sunday, October 18th, the 6th of Cheshvan. My name is Dan, and this is the second installment in my series on Classic.Hakdamot. This evening I'm going to be introducing and explaining a little bit about Rashi's commentary to Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, the book of Canticles, and Rashi, unlike his commentary to the Torah, actually wrote an introduction to his commentary on Shir HaShirim, so we're going to be looking at that. This is actually the first introduction that we'll be doing in the series on introductions. The first one was a bit of a compilation of different writings of Rashi's put together to try to illustrate his approach, but here he actually articulates a clear image of what he's trying to do with his commentary to Shir HaShirim. And I'd like to point out one sort of point of controversy as well, which is the way Rashi's commentary to Shir HaShirim has been perhaps misused or misunderstood, particularly in recent history in the way it was used by the ArtScroll Publishing House in the production of their English translation and commentary to Shir HaShirim in 1976, which then became particularly popular through their popular series of English language Chumashim, English language Sidurim, and other books which have become very popular in the American Orthodox community and beyond. So with that, if we take a look at Rashi's commentary to Shir HaShirim, Rashi actually begins with an articulation of his approach to Pshat. We saw in the previous installment, Rashi's commentary to the Torah, Rashi had kind of a dual approach to his commentary on the Torah, to articulate both what he thought was the pshat, the plain and simple meaning of the text, and at the same time to bring midrashim, which he feel that those midrashim help to bring out and further expand upon the plain meaning of the text, and particularly Rashi only chooses to select those midrashim which he feels actually fit the text or fit the context of the words close to the pshat, rather than maybe more outlandish or far-fetched midrashim. Rashi begins his introduction, Achat diber Elohim, shtaim zu shamanu or shamati. God has spoken once, twice have I heard this, from Psalm 62. And what Rashi is trying to say, as he tells us, is Mikra echad yotzei lekama te'amim. A single verse can convey multiple meanings. A single verse can have many different meanings, and even if it comes from a divine source, a single unified source, when it comes to human comprehension, the text devolves into many different interpretations and many different possibilities. And that's why, as we saw in Rashi's Torah commentary, Rashi is committed both to the Pshat understanding as well as to the Midrash. And for his interpretation to Shir HaShirim, it's going to be a subtle and important point to try to think about how does Rashi commit himself both to the Pshat, the literal or simplest understanding of the text, as well as the Midrashic or allegorical interpretation of the text. So let's continue. Sof davar, she'ein lecha mikra yodei midei mashma'o, because Rashi here is bringing us the source for his whole project from the Talmud in Masechet Shabbat, that no verse in Tanakh, no verse in Scripture can deviate completely from its meaning, from its plain meaning. Afal pi shedibru haneviim divreihem bedugma, even though prophets spoke allegorically, prophets spoke using metaphors or literary style, and therefore the meaning, the religious meaning, the philosophical meaning of a prophecy or of a biblical book is not necessarily anything related to its literal meaning. To understand the allegory or to understand the metaphor, it is necessary to interpret those metaphors and those literary techniques in their context and in their style. It would be meaningless to try to take an allegorical piece of writing or a piece of poetry and remove it from the actual words that are being used to convey the image. So what Rashi is telling us is that just like to understand prophecy in other books of Tanakh, and this is part of his more general approach to Tanakh in general across his Torah commentary, his commentary to the prophets, his commentary to the Ketuvim, Rashi here is telling us Tzarich leyashev hadugmal al ofaneha. It is important, or it is necessary, to make the allegory fit its meaning. So to take the allegory from its words and literal meaning, and then to extract the allegorical or contextual or subtler meanings that are hidden or buried inside, the analysis of poetry, the analysis of a rich literary text, demands an analysis at multiple levels. And that is really what Rashi is saying his entire project is, his entire goal is, particularly with a focus to Shir HaShirim, because it is a text that, at the one hand, seems so simple at its plain meaning. It seems to be an erotic love song between a man and a woman in the ancient Near Eastern style or Middle Near Eastern style, and at the same time, it obviously carries deep religious meaning to those rabbinic figures who argued for its inclusion in the canon of Tanakh, and to all people who followed them who found it meaningful religiously, those who incorporated its metaphors and allusions and allegories as part of the religious discourse of traditional rabbinic Judaism. So Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, takes deep religious meaning out of the allegory, out of that non-literal meaning. And so to find a place for both of them, both the literal meaning and the allegory, is deeply important for someone who's, on the one hand, coming to justify the Pshat. Rashi's job is to introduce Europe to the idea of Pshat, and at the same time, he has to make sure that he's not trying to take away the allegory, because the allegory is what really brings the meaning. And Rashi draws an analogy here between the analysis of allegory and just the very basic idea of context, that just like different stories in Tanakh or in any book, one part of the story follows the next, and the context is important, and the flow of the story is important, so too, you can't ignore the literal meaning of, and the literal or progression of the events in the story and the way the text is actually organized and written in your interpretation. And that's really Rashi's next critique. He says, Ra'iti l'sefer hazeh kama midrashei agada. I've seen many collections of midrashim on this book, Shir HaShirim. Yesh sodrim kol hasefer hazeh b'midrash echad. Some try to write the entire book out as a collection of midrashim. V'yesh mefuzarim b'kama sifrei agada mikraut levadam. Or there's one verse that's quoted here and one verse quoted here. People didn't really treat Shir HaShirim as if it were a book that had a plot and had an evolving story that starts in chapter 1 and continues through chapter 8. And Rashi really bemoans that and says, look, even if you're trying to understand this at an allegorical level using a midrash, it has to flow. It has to tell a story starting at the beginning and progressing further and going onwards. And so that's really Rashi's main critique. And he says it further, Einam midyashvim al lashon hamikra v'seder hamikraot. It doesn't fit the language, and they don't fit the order of the verses. It doesn't fit the context. And Rashi's critique is that even if you want to have an allegory, the allegory has to fit the words. It has to fit the story. And so we would really think, to a certain extent, that that would be almost an obvious criterion for an interpretation of a text, that the text is being used as the raw material to craft something larger or something deeper, that it actually has to fit when applied back, even if it takes things as allegory, even if it takes things as metaphor and takes them non-literally, but it still has to fit the progression of the events in the text. It has to fit the way the text is arranged and was written. Because again, if you're viewing this as a religiously meaningful text, as a divinely inspired text, as a text written through some sort of prophecy, then the way the book actually exists is important. It wasn't just written as a collection of pieces that were each inspired, but the book as a whole has a status as a whole book. I happen to think that that might be part of Rashi's project in other commentaries of his as well. His commentary to the Talmud, to a certain extent, tries to interpret the Talmudic text as a single book with a single, almost evolving or consistent theme throughout. And that's part of the critique that Rashi's approach to Talmud has from scholars coming from the Sephardic approach and the Gaonic approach, which really took certain passages in the Talmud as relevant and certain ones as less relevant. Rashi introduced the study of Talmud to Europe, particularly introducing to the Tosfot, where almost every piece of the Talmud becomes important as part of a larger conversation. We'll come back to that perhaps in a few weeks or months from now as we talk on some of the Talmud commentaries. That'll probably come up as well, different approaches to how to see the Talmud as a book. Rashi continues now with the second half of his introduction to Shir HaShirim, which is to try to explain what he really thinks the allegory is about, because he's going to tell you in his commentary some of the pshat explanations, as he said, and he's also going to tell you those allegories or those midrashim which he feels are relevant. And because Shir HaShirim is deeply allegorical, Rashi's project is particularly committed to the allegorical and midrashic interpretation, but specifically Rashi wants to make the allegory fit. he's going to pick midrashim that he thinks fits the text the best, rather than any old collection of midrashim that may have scattered about different texts, different pieces that don't necessarily fit together. Rashi's attempt is going to be to try to portray a unified whole. So with that, Rashi says, Omer ani, I say, this is my idea, Shira'a Shlomo Burach HaKodesh Sha'atidin L'Israel Legalot Golah Achar Golah Churban Achar Churban. Rashi is saying, I see that Solomon, when he was writing this book, predicted or saw through a certain kind of prophecy that the Jewish people would experience exile, would experience destruction, would experience suffering. And the entire text of Shir HaShirim is an allegory for the pain and suffering and longing that the Jewish people have to reconnect with God, as if two partners in a marriage, a wife and a husband, and the male character in Shir HaShirim, the Dode, is to a certain extent a personification of God's role in that relationship, and the female character in Shir HaShirim, the Raya, is a personification of the Jewish people in exile, in suffering, and trying to rebuild, rekindle, and reawaken that relationship. Rashi here draws on snippets of different psukim, different verses from across Tanakh, and particularly and notably, he draws on a number of references to the book of Hosea, the book of Hosea. Hosea was one of the prophets who particularly used this allegory for the relationship between God and Israel, that of a marriage, both in times of happiness and success, as well as during difficult times, times of infidelity, times of disgrace and suffering and reacceptance and reawakening, trying to use the marriage metaphor. So here, Rashi is articulating that he really sees the marriage metaphor as that central allegory to understanding Shir HaShirim. The male character is God, and the female character is the nation of Israel. With that, to look at right at the top of the sheet, I quoted here from ArtScroll's introduction to their 1976 Shir HaShirim commentary, and they claim that because the song is an allegory, not that it has an important religious allegorical meaning, but that it is an allegory, and that it is the duet of love between God and Israel. Therefore, every one of the major commentators finds new themes in its beautiful but cryptic words. However, they say, all agree the true and simple meaning of Shir HaShirim is the allegorical meaning. I would suggest that as much as they try to make Rashi fit into their mold, in fact, Rashi denies this. Rashi himself says, Ein mikra yotzei midei pshuto. Text does not separate from its literal meaning, from its simple meaning, from its pshat meaning. Rashi tells you that his goal is to explain both the pshat and the midrash, here too as well as in his commentary to the Torah. And it seems that Rashi's allegorical and midrashic comments to Shir HaShirim have been co-opted by the agenda, modern agenda, to sanitize and eliminate the pshat meaning of the text, and to present it as only an allegory, only as a metaphor. And I would suggest many commentators have noted the significance and importance of the underlying metaphor and allegory as well, to note that to really understand how a metaphor works, like Rashi says, you have to understand the context and the meaning and the literal meaning as well to see how it serves as a metaphor for what is being indicated. However, a number of authorities, particularly to note Rabbi Yosef Chaim, author of the Tshuvot Rav Pe'alim, who was from Baghdad, and he particularly was opposed to any popularization or public teaching of the literal meaning of Shir HaShirim in Arabic in the schools in Baghdad in his time. So there is precedent for what ArtScroll is doing in the rabbinic literature. However, it seems disingenuous to me to try to use Rashi as their poster child, particularly because Rashi himself denies the singular significance of the allegorical meaning and instead really does present a dual significance to both the pshat and the allegorical or midrashic approach. So that's Rashi's introduction to Shir HaShirim. It's Rashi's really only introduction. The next installment as a follow-up to Rashi is hopefully going to be Rashbam's commentary to the Torah, which really serves as a super commentary and refutation, or is in dialogue with Rashi's Torah commentary. That's why I wanted to join them together almost as a pair. And then I hope to go back in time a little bit to look at Rasag of Sadia Gaon's commentary and translation of the Torah into Arabic and his introduction there, where he discusses the significance of his project. Again, someone who is particularly committed to trying to bring a religious meaning to the plain, simplest and literal meaning of the text at a time when otherwise Midrash was particularly significant. From there, hopefully, to look at a few other Torah commentaries, and then to move forward to other types of rabbinic writings, such as Mishnah and Talmud commentaries, halachic works, and philosophic works, to really round out the collection. Hopefully, first with the Rishonim, the earlier scholars from up to the 15th century, and then going forward from the 15th century onward, hopefully. Hope to have another update soon. Thank you for listening. Have a good night.